The textbook slipped from Zara Blackwood's hands, hitting the dormitory floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo through Maple Ridge Hall. At 19, with paint-stained fingers and an oversized university sweatshirt, she stood frozen by her window as 3 black helicopters descended from the Montana sky like mechanical predators. Across the quad, Colonel Ryan Blackthorne emerged from the lead aircraft, his boots hitting the manicured grass with military precision. His voice, when it came through the campus loudspeakers, cut through the crisp autumn air like a blade. "We're looking for Zara Blackwood." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Northview University had always prided itself on being a sanctuary of academic pursuit, nestled in the picturesque valley of Cedar Falls, Montana. The campus, with its red brick buildings and tree-lined pathways, attracted students seeking a peaceful education far from the chaos of major cities. It was exactly the kind of place where a 19-year-old art major could blend into the background, attend classes, and live the quintessential college experience without drawing unwanted attention. Zara Blackwood had chosen Northview for precisely that reason. For the past 3 months, she had been the picture of an ordinary freshman. She lived in Maple Ridge Hall, shared a cramped dorm room with her cheerful roommate Kai Jensen, and struggled through Introduction to Philosophy like any other student figuring out their academic path. Her professors knew her as a quiet but diligent student who rarely spoke up in class discussions. Her classmates saw her as the girl who always sat in the back row, sketching in her notebook margins while taking careful notes. What they didn't see were the scars hidden beneath her long sleeves, the way she instinctively scanned every room for exits, how she slept facing the door with a clear line of sight to the window, the precise way she moved through spaces, economical and purposeful, like someone trained to conserve energy for when it truly mattered. These were details that Zara had spent months learning to suppress, habits that marked her as different in ways that could attract the wrong kind of attention. On this particular Thursday morning in early October, Zara had been preparing for her American history midterm. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was studying events she had lived through from a very different perspective. Professor Emma Sinclair's lectures on recent military operations felt surreal when you had been there, when you knew the human cost behind the sanitized academic discussions of strategic objectives and tactical successes. Kai had left early for her chemistry lab, leaving Zara alone in their shared space. The room was a study in contrasts. Kai's side, bright and cluttered with photos from home, concert posters, and the cheerful chaos of someone embracing college freedom. Zara's side was Spartan by comparison, almost militaristically neat. Her few personal items were arranged with geometric precision. Her bed was made with hospital corners that could bounce a quarter. Her textbooks were stacked by height and subject matter. The only hint of her true self was a small photograph tucked inside her psychology textbook. It showed a much younger Zara standing beside a woman in military dress blues, both of them beaming with pride. The inscription on the back, in careful handwriting, read, "My daughter the warrior, your courage will light the way home." It was the only connection to her past that Zara allowed herself to keep, hidden where casual observers would never find it. The helicopters appeared at 10:47 a.m., just as Zara was reviewing her notes on the Vietnam War. The distinctive sound of military rotors was unmistakable to her trained ear, but she told herself it was probably a training exercise from the nearby Air Force Base. Montana had plenty of military installations, and aircraft sightings weren't uncommon in the region. But as the sound grew closer rather than passing overhead, Zara felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with potential threats. She moved to her window, her body automatically taking cover behind the frame while maintaining a clear view of the quad below. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 Blackhawks were settling on the university's central lawn with mechanical precision. These weren't training aircraft or routine transport vehicles. They were the kind of helicopters used for high-priority operations. Their matte black paint and lack of identifying markings suggested a level of classification that made Zara's mouth go dry.
Students were emerging from buildings across campus, pointing and taking photos with their phones. Campus security officers were running toward the landing site, looking confused and overwhelmed. Professor Sinclair's voice could be heard through Zara's open window, calling for students to maintain a safe distance while she tried to contact the administration. From the lead helicopter, 6 figures emerged in full combat gear. Even from her third-floor window, Zara could identify their unit by their movement patterns, equipment configuration, and the way they established a perimeter. Delta Force. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Colonel Ryan Blackthorne was unmistakable even at a distance. Tall, imposing, with the kind of presence that commanded attention and immediate obedience. Zara had worked with him before, in places and circumstances that she had spent months trying to forget. Seeing him here, in the one place she had thought was safe from her past, felt like watching her carefully constructed new life collapse in real time. The campus public address system crackled to life, causing students and faculty to look up at the speakers mounted on various buildings. When Blackthorne's voice emerged, clear and authoritative, the entire university seemed to hold its breath. Attention! We are looking for Zara Blackwood, currently enrolled as a freshman student. This is an official military matter. Miss Blackwood is requested to report to the quad immediately. Zara's legs gave out and she sank to the floor of her dorm room, her back against the wall. Around campus, she could hear voices rising in confusion and excitement. Students were probably wondering what kind of trouble the quiet art major could possibly be in. Faculty members were likely concerned about the unprecedented military presence on their peaceful campus. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kai. OMG, are you seeing this? Military helicopters on campus looking for someone named Zara Blackwood. Do you know who that is? This is insane. Zara stared at the message, her hands trembling slightly. In a few minutes, Kai would remember that her roommate's name was Zara Blackwood. The entire campus would realize that the unassuming freshman in Maple Ridge Hall was the person that Delta Force had come to find. For 3 months, Zara had successfully maintained her cover as a normal college student. She had attended parties, struggled with coursework, complained about cafeteria food, and participated in the mundane rituals of university life. She had convinced herself that she could build a new identity, that her past could remain buried beneath layers of academic routine and youthful normalcy. But as she watched more soldiers deploy from the helicopters, establishing a security perimeter around the landing zone with textbook efficiency, Zara understood that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to be shattered. The girl who had spent months perfecting the art of being overlooked was about to become the center of attention in the most public and dramatic way possible. Outside her window, Colonel Blackthorne was consulting what appeared to be a campus directory with Chief Daniel Cross, the head of university security. It was only a matter of time before they narrowed down her location. Military personnel trained to find people in hostile territory wouldn't have much difficulty locating one 19-year-old girl in a college dormitory. Zara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center herself the way she had been trained. In a few minutes, she would have to face the consequences of thinking she could escape her past. She would have to explain to her friends, her professors, and her newfound sense of normal life why the most elite military unit in the United States had tracked her down to a small Montana university. But first, she had to decide who she was going to be when she walked out of this room. The frightened freshman who had been hiding from her past, or the person she had been before she started running. As the sound of military boots echoed through the hallway outside her door, Zara realized that choice was about to be made for her. The knock on Zara's door came exactly 7 minutes after the helicopters had landed. 3 sharp raps, followed by a pause, then 2 more. It was a military pattern,
one that Zara recognized from countless briefings and operational protocols. The person on the other side wasn't campus security or a curious student. This was someone who knew exactly who they were looking for. "Miss Blackwood," came a voice through the door. "This is Sergeant Cooper, United States Army. We need to speak with you." Zara remained seated on the floor, her back against the wall, calculating her options. The window offered a 3-story drop onto concrete. The hallway would be monitored. There was nowhere to run, and honestly, she was tired of running. For 3 months, she had lived in constant fear that this moment would come. Now that it had arrived, she felt an unexpected sense of relief, mixed with dread. "One moment," she called out, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. She stood, smoothed down her university sweatshirt, and checked her reflection in the small mirror above her desk. The girl looking back at her appeared younger than her 19 years, with careful makeup designed to enhance her appearance of innocence and vulnerability. It was a mask she had perfected, but one that was about to become useless. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with 2 soldiers in full combat gear. Sergeant Cooper was exactly what she had expected: professional, alert, and completely focused on his mission. Behind him stood Lieutenant Hayes, a woman whose presence immediately commanded respect. Both were armed, though their weapons remained holstered. "Miss Blackwood," Sergeant Cooper said, his tone respectful but firm, "Colonel Blackthorne has requested your immediate presence on the quad. This is not a request." "I understand," Zara replied, stepping into the hallway. As they walked toward the elevator, she could hear doors opening behind them. Her fellow students were peering out, whispering among themselves, taking photos and videos with their phones. By tonight, she knew footage of her being escorted by military personnel would be circulating on every social media platform. The elevator ride was silent, but Zara could feel both soldiers studying her. They were probably wondering how this unassuming college student had ended up on Delta Force's priority list. She wondered if they had been briefed on her background or if they were operating with minimal information, following orders without understanding the full context. As they emerged into the lobby of Maple Ridge Hall, Zara saw that the entire first floor was buzzing with activity. Students clustered around windows, trying to get a better view of the military presence outside. Professor Sinclair was among them, her face pale with concern as she spoke rapidly into her cell phone, probably updating university administrators about the unprecedented situation. "Zara!" The voice belonged to Finn O'Connor, a fellow freshman from her philosophy class. He was staring at her with complete bewilderment, his eyes shifting between her face and the armed soldiers flanking her. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Zara said quietly, though even she wasn't sure if that was true. "Everything's going to be okay." But as they pushed through the crowd of students and emerged into the bright October sunlight, Zara realized that nothing would ever be okay again. The central quad of Northview University had been transformed into a military staging area. Students and faculty lined the perimeter, held back by a security cordon that had appeared with impressive efficiency. Campus security officers stood alongside military personnel, their faces showing a mixture of confusion and concern. Colonel Ryan Blackthorne stood in the center of it all, his presence commanding the space like a general surveying a battlefield. He was older than Zara remembered, his face lined with new stress marks that spoke of difficult missions and harder decisions. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted from professional focus to something more complex. Relief, perhaps, mixed with disappointment. "Zara," he said as she was brought before him. His voice carried easily across the quad, ensuring that every watching student and faculty member could hear the exchange. "Colonel," she replied, falling instinctively into the posture and tone she had been trained to use when addressing superior officers. The change was subtle, but immediate, and she saw recognition flicker in the eyes of several students who had never seen this side of her personality. "You've been difficult to find," Blackthorne continued, his gaze taking in her civilian clothes, her university ID badge, the carefully crafted appearance of innocence and vulnerability. It was a mask she had perfected, but one that was about to become useless. When you opened the door, she found herself face to face with two soldiers in full combat gear. Though I have to admit, hiding in plain sight as a college freshman was creative. Not many people would think to look for Sergeant Zara Blackwood in an Introduction to Art History class.
The murmur that went through the crowd was audible. Sergeant? The title hung in the air like a challenge to everything these people thought they knew about the quiet girl from Maple Ridge Hall. Zara could feel hundreds of eyes on her, reassessing every interaction they had ever had, every assumption they had made about her background and capabilities. "I'm not Sergeant Blackwood anymore," Zara said quietly. "I'm just a student here." "Are you?" Blackthorne's tone carried a hint of skepticism. "Because the Sergeant Blackwood I know wouldn't have allowed these students to cluster so close to military aircraft without establishing proper safety protocols. She wouldn't have ignored the tactical disadvantage of being surrounded by potential targets, and she certainly wouldn't have waited 7 minutes to answer her door when she heard helicopters landing." The accuracy of his observations made Zara's stomach clench. Even while trying to maintain her civilian cover, her training had been constantly analyzing threats, calculating risks, maintaining situational awareness. She had noticed the same tactical concerns he was pointing out, but she had forced herself to ignore them in order to maintain her disguise. "Why are you here?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You know why." Blackthorne's voice carried the weight of shared history, of operations they had both participated in, of secrets that bound them together whether she wanted that connection or not. 3 months ago, you disappeared from a military hospital in Germany. No discharge papers, no forwarding address, no communication with your unit or your family. People have been looking for you. "I needed time," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. But in the absolute silence of the quad, where hundreds of people were straining to hear every word, her response carried clearly. "Time for what? To pretend that the last 3 years of your life didn't happen? To act like you're just another teenager worried about midterms and weekend parties?" Blackthorne's frustration was evident, though he kept his voice controlled and professional. "Time to figure out who I am without the military defining me. Time to see if I could be a normal person, living a normal life." Blackthorne studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Around them, the crowd of students and faculty waited in suspended silence, witnessing a conversation that was clearly about much more than they could understand. Finally, he spoke. "The situation in Syria has deteriorated. The mission you were extracted from is being reactivated. We need our best intelligence operative back in the field." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. Syria. The mission that had nearly killed her. The operation that had left her with scars both visible and invisible, that had driven her to flee from everything she had ever known in search of something resembling peace. "I'm not that person anymore," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she could feel her carefully constructed civilian identity beginning to crack under the pressure of her true nature. "We'll see about that," Blackthorne replied, his tone suggesting that this conversation was far from over. The tension in the quad was broken by the sharp crack of breaking glass. A second-floor window in the Defense Study Center had shattered, sending shards cascading onto the pathway below. Students screamed and scattered, their orderly perimeter dissolving into chaos as people pushed and shoved to escape the falling debris. But Zara didn't run. While everyone else's attention was focused upward on the broken window, she had already identified the real threat. The sound hadn't come from an accident or structural failure. Her trained ear had caught the distinctive whistle that preceded the glass breaking. Something small and fast-moving had been thrown with considerable force and accuracy. "Sniper!" she said quietly, the word carrying clearly in the sudden silence that followed the initial panic. Her voice was calm, professional, completely different from the uncertain freshman tone she had been using moments before. Second floor, east corner of the Defense Studies building. Trajectory suggests the projectile came from approximately 45 degrees, which puts the source at... She paused, her eyes scanning the surrounding buildings with mechanical precision, calculating angles and sightlines with the kind of speed that only came from extensive training and real-world experience. The clock tower, she finished, pointing to the campus's most distinctive landmark. Third level, north-facing window. Colonel Blackthorne's head snapped toward her, his expression shifting from surprise to something approaching respect. How can you be certain? Because that's where I would position myself if I wanted overwatch of this quad while maintaining multiple escape routes, Zara replied, her mind automatically running through tactical considerations that she had spent months trying to suppress. The clock tower offers 360 visibility, multiple stairwells, and direct access to the underground maintenance tunnels that connect to the parking structures. Lieutenant Hayes was already speaking rapidly into her radio, coordinating with her team to secure the area Zara had identified. Sergeant Cooper had his weapon drawn, not pointing it at anyone, but ready for immediate use if the situation escalated. "Students," Blackthorne called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations. "Move away from the buildings. Form up in the center of the quad where you have clear sight lines in all directions." But the students weren't moving fast enough for Zara's comfort. Their panic was understandable, but tactically dangerous. A crowd of confused civilians created countless opportunities for additional threats to emerge, and their random movement patterns made it nearly impossible to maintain effective security. "No," Zara said sharply, stepping forward before she could stop herself. "Not the center. That makes them a clustered target. Spread them along the perimeter, backs to the outer fence, facing inward. Create multiple smaller groups rather than one large mass. And get someone to the administration building to activate the emergency broadcast system. If this is a diversion, we need to account for all students and faculty across campus." The words came out with the crisp efficiency of someone who had managed similar situations before, someone who understood the difference between crowd control and tactical positioning. Every person watching could hear the authority in her voice, the kind of confidence that only came from experience and genuinely dangerous situations. Colonel Blackthorne studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded to his team, who began implementing her suggestions with immediate efficiency. The students, confused but recognizing the logic in her instructions, began moving toward the positions she had indicated. "Impressive," Colonel Blackthorne said quietly, stepping closer to Zara so that their conversation wouldn't carry to the surrounding crowd. 3 months of playing college student, and your tactical instincts are still sharper than most of my active personnel. "It was just common sense," Zara replied, but even she could hear how weak the deflection sounded. Common sense didn't include knowledge of university maintenance tunnel systems or the ability to calculate sniper angles in seconds. Common sense didn't explain why she had instinctively moved to shield nearby students when the glass had broken, positioning herself between them and the potential threat source. "Was it?" Blackthorne asked. "Because I'm watching a 19-year-old art major demonstrate tactical awareness that most of my lieutenants couldn't match. I'm seeing someone who automatically assessed multiple threat vectors, calculated optimal positioning for civilian protection, and identified the most likely source of hostile fire in under 30 seconds.
Professor Sinclair approached them cautiously, her academic credentials clearly making her uncomfortable with the military terminology being thrown around. "Colonel, I don't understand what's happening here. Zara is one of my students. She's never shown any indication of military background or tactical training. She struggles with basic military history concepts in my classes." "Does she?" Blackthorne asked, his gaze never leaving Zara's face. "Or does she pretend to struggle because demonstrating her real knowledge would raise questions she didn't want to answer?" The observation hit closer to home than Zara was comfortable with. She had indeed been careful to perform at average levels in all her classes, particularly Professor Sinclair's military studies course. Answering questions with the kind of detailed knowledge that came from actually participating in the operations being discussed would have been a dead giveaway. Lieutenant Hayes' voice crackled through the radio. Tower secured, no hostile presence found, but there's evidence someone was here recently. Cigarette butts, food wrappers, and what looks like a makeshift observation post. Decoy, Zara said immediately. Classic misdirection. The real threat isn't in the tower. It never was. The broken window was designed to draw attention and resources away from the actual objective. Which is? Blackthorne asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Zara looked around the quad, noting the positions of the military personnel, the location of the helicopters, the dispersed students and faculty. Her mind automatically began calculating what a hostile force would want to achieve in this situation. Me, she said quietly. This whole thing is about separating me from any potential protection, isolating me in an open space where I can be easily observed and assessed. Someone wanted to see how I would react under pressure, whether my training would override my civilian cover. As if summoned by her words, Kai appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale with confusion and growing realization. She was staring at Zara with the expression of someone trying to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they thought they knew. "Zara," Kai called out, her voice carrying across the quad, "what's going on? Who are you really?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, hundreds of students and faculty members waited for an answer that would either confirm or shatter everything they believed about the quiet freshman from Maple Ridge Hall. Zara looked at her roommate, seeing the hurt and confusion in her eyes. For 3 months, they had shared a living space, studied together, complained about cafeteria food, and built what Zara had thought was a genuine friendship. Now she realized that Kai had been living with a stranger, someone who had been lying about every fundamental aspect of her identity. "I'm someone who used to be very good at things I'm trying to forget. I'm someone who came here hoping to learn how to be normal, how to be the kind of person who worries about midterms instead of mission parameters." She paused, looking around at the faces surrounding her, students who had accepted her as one of their own, professors who had seen her as just another young person figuring out her path, friends who had trusted her with their own stories while she had kept her truth locked away. "I'm someone who thought she could leave her past behind, but apparently the past has other plans."
The conference room in the administration building had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Dean Victoria Reed sat at the head of the polished oak table, her usual composure strained as she tried to process the unprecedented situation that had unfolded on her campus. To her right sat Colonel Blackthorne, his presence commanding even in the academic setting. Chief Cross flanked her left side, his campus security badge looking insignificant next to the military credentials surrounding him. Zara occupied the chair directly across from the dean, still wearing her university sweatshirt, but somehow looking entirely different than she had that morning. The transformation wasn't physical. She was the same 19-year-old who had been studying for her American history midterm just hours earlier. But something fundamental had shifted in her posture, her alertness, the way she held herself. The mask of ordinary college student had slipped, revealing glimpses of someone far more complex underneath. "Miss Blackwood," Dean Reed began, consulting a folder that had appeared with suspicious speed. "I'm looking at your admission file, and I have to say it raises more questions than it answers." Zara remained silent, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had expected this moment since the helicopters had landed. Academic institutions, despite their liberal ideals, were bureaucratic organizations that required documentation, verification, and paper trails. Her enrollment at Northview had been carefully orchestrated, but under serious scrutiny, the facade would crumble. "Your high school transcripts are from Riverside Academy in Portland," Dean Reed continued. "But when I called their registrar 20 minutes ago, they had no record of a student named Zara Blackwood graduating in their class of 2024. Colonel Blackthorne leaned forward slightly. "That's because she didn't graduate from high school in the traditional sense. She earned her GED while serving overseas." "Serving overseas?" Chief Cross interjected, his voice rising with incredulity. "She's 19 years old. When exactly was she serving overseas?"
That information is classified, Blackthorne replied curtly. What I can tell you is that Zara Blackwood enlisted in the United States Army at 17 with parental consent. She completed basic training, advanced individual training, and specialized intelligence schooling before being deployed to active combat zones. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Dean Reed's face had gone pale. Chief Cross was staring at Zara as if seeing her for the first time since entering the room. The idea that the quiet freshman who had been living in their dormitory for 3 months was actually a combat veteran was almost impossible to process. Combat zones, Dean Reed repeated weakly. What kind of combat zones? The kind that requires security clearances I'm not authorized to discuss in this setting, Blackthorne said. What I will tell you is that Zara Blackwood served with distinction in multiple theaters of operation. She received commendations for valor, intelligence gathering, and tactical innovation. She saved American lives on more than one occasion. Zara felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came with hearing her military accomplishments recited like a resume. Those commendations represented some of the worst moments of her life. Operations where success had been measured in casualties prevented rather than objectives achieved. The valor citations were for actions she wished she could forget, split-second decisions made in situations no 19-year-old should ever face. If she's such an accomplished soldier, Chief Cross asked, why is she hiding out in a college dormitory? Why not return to active duty? The question struck at the heart of everything Zara had been running from. She looked up from her hands, meeting the chief's gaze directly for the first time since entering the room. Because sometimes being good at something doesn't mean you want to keep doing it. Because there's a difference between being capable of violence and wanting to build a life around it. Zara was extracted from her last mission under difficult circumstances, Blackthorne explained, his tone carrying a note of something that might have been sympathy. She spent several weeks in a military medical facility in Germany, recovering from both physical and psychological trauma. When she was cleared for discharge processing, she disappeared. You mean she went AWL, Dean Reed said, her administrative mind automatically translating military euphemisms to civilian terms. Technically, she was between assignments and had accrued leave time, Blackthorne replied carefully, but yes, she left without authorization and without maintaining contact with her chain of command.
Zara could feel their eyes on her, waiting for an explanation that she wasn't sure she could provide. How do you explain to civilians that you can't sleep without dreaming about the faces of people you've killed? How do you describe the feeling of being 19 years old and having more blood on your hands than most soldiers accumulate in entire careers? I needed to find out if I could be someone else, she said finally. I wanted to see if I could live a normal life, make normal friends, worry about normal problems. I wanted to know if there was more to me than just being a weapon. The honesty in her voice seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including herself. For 3 months, she had been so focused on maintaining her cover that she had almost forgotten the genuine desperation that had driven her to create it in the first place. And have you? Dean Reed asked gently. Found out if you can be someone else? Zara thought about the morning she had spent studying for her history exam, the conversations with Kai about boys and classes and weekend plans, the simple pleasure of sitting in Professor Sinclair's lectures without calculating threat assessments or exit strategies. I thought so, she admitted. For a while, I really thought I could just be a student, just be Zara, the art major who struggles with philosophy and makes terrible coffee in the dorm kitchen. But, Colonel Blackthorne prompted, but when those helicopters landed, when I heard the glass break, when I saw students and potential danger, I couldn't turn it off. The training, the awareness, the need to assess and respond to threats. It's not something I do, it's something I am. Chief Cross leaned back in his chair, studying her with new respect. That's why you knew about the maintenance tunnels, why you could identify sniper positions and calculate tactical angles. It wasn't luck or common sense. No, Zara confirmed. It was 3 years of training and 18 months of active deployment in some of the most dangerous places on Earth.
The room fell silent as the implications of her admission sank in. This wasn't just a case of a student with a mysterious background. This was a highly trained intelligence operative who had been living undetected in their community for months, someone whose very presence changed the security calculus of the entire campus. The question now, Dean Reed said slowly, is what happens next? Do you return to military service? Do you continue your education here? Can you continue your education here, given what we now know? Before Zara could respond, Colonel Blackthorne's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression darkened as he read it, and when he looked up, his focus had shifted entirely to operational priorities. Dean Reed, I'm afraid this discussion will have to continue later. We've just received intelligence that changes everything. The situation that brought me here has escalated significantly. He turned to Zara, and she could see the weight of command decisions in his eyes. Sergeant Blackwood, I'm officially reactivating your security clearance. We have a developing crisis that requires your specific expertise. What kind of crisis? Zara asked, though she was already dreading the answer. The kind that could get a lot of people killed if we don't have our best people working to prevent it. The kind that doesn't care if you want to be a normal college student.
The secure communications center that had been hastily established in the university's library basement bore no resemblance to the quiet study space it had been that morning. Banks of military-grade equipment hummed with electronic activity, their screens displaying satellite feeds, intelligence reports, and tactical assessments that made Zara's stomach clench with familiar dread. She sat at a workstation that had been configured for her specific clearance level, staring at classified documents she had hoped never to see again. The mission briefing was spread across multiple monitors, each piece of information adding another layer to a crisis that was unfolding in real time halfway around the world. The situation in Syria has deteriorated beyond our worst-case projections, Colonel Blackthorne explained, standing behind her as she absorbed the intelligence reports. The network you helped dismantle 6 months ago has reconstituted itself under new leadership. They've acquired assets that make them significantly more dangerous than before. Zara's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, cross-referencing tactical assessments with personnel files and operational histories. The familiar rhythm of intelligence analysis felt both natural and deeply unwelcome, like slipping back into clothes that fit perfectly but carried the smell of smoke and blood. Chemical weapons, she said quietly, highlighting a section of the briefing that detailed intercepted communications. They're not just talking about conventional explosives anymore. Correct. And according to our sources, they're planning to deploy them against civilian targets in major European cities. The timeline suggests coordinated attacks within the next 72 hours. The weight of that information settled on Zara's shoulders like a familiar burden. 72 hours. Thousands of potential casualties. The kind of ticking clock scenario that had defined too many nights of her military service, when the difference between success and catastrophic failure could be measured in minutes or even seconds. Why me, she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. You have entire teams of analysts who can work this intelligence. Because you know these people, Blackthorne replied, pulling up a series of photographs on her secondary monitor. You've been inside their organizational structure. You understand how they think, how they operate, how they adapt when their plans are compromised. The faces on the screen were achingly familiar. Men and women she had worked alongside while undercover, people who had trusted her with their lives while she gathered intelligence that would ultimately lead to their capture or death. The betrayal was mutual. They had been planning mass murder, while she had been lying about her identity and loyalty. Hassan al-Rashid, she said, pointing to one of the photographs. I thought he was killed in the Aleppo raid. So did we. Turns out he survived and has been rebuilding the network from the ground up. He's learned from the previous operation's failures, implemented new security protocols, and recruited operatives specifically chosen for their ability to operate in Western environments. Zara's hands studied al-Rashid's file, noting the updates that had been added since her last mission. New associates, changed operational patterns, evidence of technological sophistication that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. The organization she had helped destroy had evolved, adapted, become something more dangerous in its reconstruction. He knows I'm alive, she said, reading between the lines of the intelligence reports. You know I was the source of the intelligence that brought down the original network.
We believe so, yes, which is why we need you back in the field. You're the only operative who can identify the new players, predict their strategies, and potentially infiltrate their operations before the attacks are launched. The casual way Blackthorne delivered that assessment made Zara's blood run cold. Back in the field, the phrase carried implications that she had spent 3 months trying to escape. It meant returning to a world where her survival depended on deception, violence, and the kind of moral compromises that left permanent scars on the soul. I can't, I won't, she said, pushing back from the workstation. Zara. My name is Zara Blackwood, and I'm a freshman art major at Northview University. I study for midterms and worry about cafeteria food and whether my roommate thinks I'm weird for making my bed with hospital corners. I don't infiltrate terrorist networks or gather intelligence on chemical weapons attacks.
Colonel Blackthorne studied her for a long moment, his expression mixing frustration with something that might have been understanding. Is that really who you think you are? Because the woman I've been watching for the past few hours, the one who identified sniper positions and coordinated civilian evacuation procedures, she didn't look like someone worried about cafeteria food. The observation stung because it was accurate. From the moment the helicopters had landed, Zara had been operating on instinct and training that she couldn't simply switch off. Her careful performance as a normal college student had crumbled under pressure, revealing the operative underneath. That doesn't mean I have to go back, she said, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Doesn't it? Blackthorne pulled up another screen, this one showing surveillance footage from a train station in Paris. This was taken yesterday. Recognize anyone? Zara leaned forward despite herself, her trained eye automatically analyzing the crowd for familiar faces. It took her less than 30 seconds to spot him, Mahmoud Qassem, one of al-Rashid's most trusted lieutenants, someone she had worked closely with during her undercover operation. He's not supposed to be in Paris, she said automatically. His operational zone was limited to Syria and Lebanon. If he's in Europe, it means the attacks are imminent, Blackthorne finished, and it means they're using operatives we didn't know they had, people who weren't in our database, who survived the original network's destruction, who have been planning this for months. The implications were staggering. If al-Rashid had been able to place operatives in major European cities without detection, if he had access to chemical weapons and the expertise to deploy them effectively, if he was operating with the kind of sophistication that the surveillance footage suggested, how many people are we talking about? Zara asked quietly. Conservative estimates, 50,000 casualties if they hit their primary targets during peak hours. Could be significantly higher if they coordinate the attacks for maximum psychological impact. 50,000 people. The number was abstract, impossible to truly comprehend, but Zara had seen enough death to understand what it represented. Families destroyed, communities shattered, a level of suffering that would ripple across generations. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Kai. "Hey, are you okay? Heard there was some kind of security thing on campus. Want to grab dinner later and talk?" The normalcy of the message, the genuine concern from someone who had become a real friend, made Zara's decision even more agonizing. Kai represented everything she had been trying to build, authentic relationships based on truth rather than operational necessity, a life where her value wasn't measured in successful missions or intelligence gathered. But 50,000 people didn't get to make that choice. They would wake up tomorrow morning worried about their own normal problems, work deadlines, family obligations, weekend plans, without knowing that their continued existence might depend on whether one burned-out 19-year-old operative could summon the courage to return to a life she had desperately wanted to escape. "If I do this," Zara said slowly, not yet committing but no longer refusing, "what happens to my life here? What happens to the person I've been trying to become?" "I don't know," Blackthorne admitted, "but I know what happens to those 50,000 people if you don't." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Outside the basement windows, Zara could see the legs of students walking past, heading to evening classes or dinner plans or study groups.
Normal people living normal lives, blissfully unaware that their safety might depend on decisions being made in a converted library basement by people they would never meet. She thought about her father, about the pride in his eyes when she had enlisted, about his belief that service meant something more than personal comfort or individual desires. She thought about the photograph in her psychology textbook, about his words, "Your courage will light the way home." Maybe home wasn't a place you returned to. Maybe it was something you carried with you, even into the darkness. "What do you need me to do?" she asked.
The news broke at 6:47 p.m. Mountain Time, just as students across Northview University were settling in for evening study sessions. Campus security had tried to maintain information control, but in an age of social media and instant communication, containing a story involving military helicopters and federal agents was impossible. The first report appeared on a local news blog. Military operation disrupts classes at Northview University. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets, then national networks. By the time Zara emerged from the basement communication center, her face was being broadcast across the country alongside speculation about terrorism, national security threats, and government cover-ups. Zara Blackwood, 19, a freshman art major, had become suspected intelligence operative with classified background. The transformation from anonymous college student to national news story had taken less than 8 hours. She found Kai waiting in the lobby of Maple Ridge Hall, surrounded by a cluster of their floor mates. Everyone was talking at once, voices elevated with excitement and confusion. When Zara appeared, the conversation stopped abruptly. "There she is," whispered Sage Martinez, pointing with barely concealed awe. "That's her!" Kai stood slowly, her expression cycling through emotions that Zara couldn't quite read. Relief, hurt, confusion, and something that might have been fear, all flickered across her roommate's face as she approached. "Is it true?" Kai asked, without preamble. "What they're saying on the news, that you're some kind of spy?" The question hung in the air, drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. Students from other floors had gathered in the lobby, their phones out and recording, eager to capture whatever revelation was about to unfold. Zara realized that her answer would define not just her relationship with Kai, but her entire future at Northview University. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Complicated how? Complicated like you're actually older than you said? Complicated like you're not really from Portland? Or complicated like you've been lying about every single thing since the day we met?" The hurt in Kai's voice was palpable, cutting through Zara's defenses more effectively than any interrogation technique she had faced. This wasn't about operational security or national interests. This was about the simple human cost of deception, the way lies poisoned even the most innocent relationships. "I never lied about being your friend," Zara said quietly. "That was real. Everything else, the studying together, complaining about Professor Hartwell's assignments, staying up too late talking about stupid things, all of that was real." "But your name isn't real, your background isn't real, your age probably isn't real." Kai was crying now, her voice breaking with each accusation. "How am I supposed to know what was genuine and what was just part of your cover story?" Before Zara could respond, Professor Sinclair appeared in the lobby, her usual academic composure replaced by barely controlled anger. She pushed through the crowd of students with the determination of someone who had been personally betrayed. "Miss Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "Or should I say Sergeant Blackwood? I've just finished speaking with the dean about your situation." The formal tone was like a slap. For 3 months, Professor Sinclair had been more than just an instructor. She'd been a mentor, someone who had encouraged Zara's interest in military history and international relations. The disappointment in her voice was crushing. "Professor, I can explain." "Can you?"
Because I've been teaching military studies for 15 years, and I've never encountered a student who deliberately performed below their capabilities to avoid detection. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel as an educator, knowing that I failed to recognize the expertise sitting right in front of me? The accusation stung because it contained an element of truth. Zara had indeed been careful to give answers that demonstrated competence without revealing the depth of her knowledge. She had written papers that earned B-plus grades instead of the A-plus work she was capable of producing. She had asked questions that suggested academic curiosity rather than operational experience. I was trying to protect what? Your cover? Your mission? Or were you protecting us from the truth about who you really are? Professor Sinclair's voice carried the disappointment of someone who prided herself on connecting with students, on recognizing and nurturing their potential.
The crowd in the lobby had grown larger, with students from across campus arriving to witness the confrontation. Phones were recording every word, every gesture, turning what should have been a private conversation into public entertainment. Zara could see her story being twisted in real time, transformed from complex reality into simplified narrative that would follow her for years. "I was trying to protect myself," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I was trying to protect the chance to be someone other than what I was trained to be." The honesty in her admission seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. For 3 months, she had been so focused on maintaining operational security that she had almost forgotten the desperate personal motivations that had driven her to create this false identity. "What were you trained to be?" asked Finn O'Connor, the question carrying genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Zara looked around the lobby, seeing faces she had come to know and care about over the past 3 months. These were people who had accepted her as one of their own, who had shared their own vulnerabilities and dreams with someone they thought was their peer. They deserved better than half-truths and deflections. "I was trained to be a weapon," she said simply. "Specifically, I was trained to infiltrate hostile organizations, gather intelligence, and eliminate threats to national security. I was very good at it." The bluntness of her statement sent a ripple through the crowd. This wasn't the sanitized version of military service that most civilians were familiar with. This was acknowledgement of the darker realities that most people preferred not to think about. "Eliminate threats?" Sage asked, her voice barely audible. "Kill people," Zara clarified, meeting her gaze directly. "I killed people who were planning to kill other people. I gathered information that prevented terrorist attacks. I did things that were necessary for national security, but that left me unable to sleep without nightmares." The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the students who had been recording seemed frozen, unsure whether they wanted to capture this level of brutal honesty. "That's why I came here," Zara continued, her voice growing stronger as she finally spoke the truth she had been carrying alone for months. "I wanted to find out if I could be someone else, someone who solved problems with creativity instead of violence, someone who built things instead of destroying them, someone who could make friends based on genuine connection rather than operational necessity." She looked directly at Kai, seeing tears streaming down her roommate's face. "I wanted to know if I could be the kind of person you thought I was, someone worthy of friendship that wasn't based on lies." "And what did you find out?" Professor Sinclair asked, her anger giving way to something that might have been compassion. "I found out that I could be that person, but only by running away from who I really am. And now 50,000 people might die because I was selfish enough to think my personal peace was more important than doing what I was trained to do." The weight of that admission settled over the lobby like a physical presence. These students had been living their normal lives, worried about grades and relationships and career prospects,
while someone among them had been carrying the knowledge that her personal choices could have global consequences. 50,000 people? Kai whispered. Chemical weapons attack in Europe. Coordinated strikes on civilian targets. The intelligence suggests it will happen within the next 60 hours unless someone stops it. Zara's voice was steady now, professional, the tone of someone delivering a tactical briefing. "And you can stop it?" Professor Sinclair asked. "I can try. I know the people involved, understand their operational patterns, might be able to infiltrate their network or gather intelligence that prevents the attacks." She paused, looking around at faces that would haunt her dreams regardless of what choice she made. "What are you going to do?" Kai asked finally. Zara closed her eyes, thinking of her father's words, of the 50,000 faces she would never see, of the life she was about to sacrifice for a duty she had tried so hard to escape. What I was trained to do. What I should have done months ago.
The flight to Washington, D.C. took 4 hours, but for Zara, it felt like traveling backward through time. With each mile that passed beneath the military transport aircraft, she could feel her carefully constructed civilian identity falling away, like layers of paint stripped from metal. The university sweatshirt had been replaced by tactical gear. The backpack full of textbooks had given way to specialized equipment whose very presence reminded her of capabilities she had hoped to forget. Across the narrow cabin, Colonel Blackthorne reviewed mission parameters on a secure tablet, occasionally glancing up to study her with an expression that mixed professional assessment with something approaching concern. He had seen too many operatives burn out, too many soldiers who reached a breaking point and never quite recovered their edge. "You don't have to do this," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the aircraft's engines. "I want that on the record. No one is forcing you back into service." 50,000 people, Zara replied, without looking up from her own briefing materials. "That's force enough. Is it? Or is it guilt over leaving your post without authorization?" Blackthorne's question carried the weight of years spent managing operatives who confused duty with self-punishment. Because there's a difference between choosing to serve and being driven by shame. The observation struck closer to home than Zara was comfortable with. For 3 months, she had been telling herself that her exile to Northview University was about self-discovery and healing. But underneath that narrative had been a constant awareness that she was running away from responsibility, abandoning a post while others carried the burden she had dropped. "Does it matter?" she asked. "The mission parameters are the same regardless of my motivation." "It matters because motivation affects performance. It matters because operatives who return to the field carrying unresolved guilt tend to take unnecessary risks. They start treating missions like penance instead of tactical objectives." Before Zara could respond, her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender was identified only as KJ, Kai Jensen, who had somehow managed to get access to Zara's military contact information. The message was brief. "Whatever you're about to do, remember that some of us think you're worth coming home to." The simple honesty of the statement made Zara's throat tighten. In the chaos of revelation and deployment, she had assumed that her friendships at Northview were casualties of her deception. The idea that someone still cared enough to reach out, despite feeling betrayed by months of lies, was both humbling and terrifying. "Personal communication?" Blackthorne asked, noting her reaction. "My roommate. Former roommate, I guess." Zara tucked the phone away, but the message had shifted something fundamental in her perspective. "She's reminding me that I have something to lose now." Good. Operatives with something to lose are more careful. They're also more effective because they understand what they're protecting. The aircraft began its descent toward Andrews Air Force Base, where a specialized briefing team would provide final intelligence updates before Zara's insertion into the field. Through the small window, she could see the lights of the Capitol spreading below them like a circuit board, each illuminated point representing thousands of lives that depended on decisions made by people they would never meet. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Professor Sinclair.
Just wanted you to know that your final paper on modern intelligence operations was brilliant. I should have recognized the expertise behind it. Stay safe and remember that teaching is also a form of service." Then another from Finn O'Connor. "Dude, I can't believe I was complaining about midterms to someone who's probably saved more lives than our entire graduating class combined. Come back and tell us stories." And another from Sage Martinez. "My dad served in Afghanistan. He says the hardest part isn't the fighting. It's carrying the weight of what you've done to protect people who will never know your name. You're not alone in that." The messages kept coming as word spread among the Northview community. Students she barely knew, professors from classes she hadn't taken, even staff members from the dining hall and maintenance crews. Each message was different, but they all carried the same underlying theme: acknowledgement, support, and the promise that she had a community waiting for her return. "Popular student," Blackthorne observed, watching her scroll through the notifications. "I thought they'd hate me for lying to them, for being something other than what they believed. They might have, if you'd been lying for selfish reasons, but you were lying to protect them from the reality of what you'd experienced. There's a difference between deception for personal gain and deception for protection."
The aircraft touched down with mechanical precision, the familiar routine of military logistics taking over. Within minutes, Zara was being transferred to a secure vehicle that would take her to the Pentagon for final mission briefing. The world outside the tinted windows looked surreal after months of campus quads and dormitory hallways, a landscape of power and consequence that felt both foreign and familiar. At the Pentagon, the briefing room was filled with faces she recognized from previous operations: intelligence analysts who had processed her field reports, tactical coordinators who had planned missions around her capabilities, senior officers who had relied on her assessments to make life and death decisions. Their expressions mixed relief at her return with concern about her readiness for immediate deployment. "The target network has accelerated their timeline," General Amanda Pierce announced without preamble. "Intelligence suggests the attacks will commence in 36 hours rather than 72. Chemical weapons deployment in Paris, London, and Berlin during morning rush hour." The updated timeline hit Zara like a physical blow. 36 hours meant no time for extensive preparation, no opportunity to develop alternative strategies, no margin for error in an operation that was already extremely high risk. "Insertion point?" she asked, her mind automatically shifting into operational mode. "Frankfurt. You'll enter Germany on diplomatic passport, make contact with our embedded asset, and attempt to infiltrate the network through established protocols. Primary objective is intelligence gathering to identify specific targets and prevent deployment. Secondary objective is elimination of key personnel if prevention isn't possible." The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality of what they were asking her to do: return to the life she had fled, resume relationships with people who wanted her dead, and potentially kill individuals she had once worked alongside, all to prevent an attack that would claim thousands of innocent lives. "Timeline for decision?" she asked. "Transport leaves in 4 hours. We need your commitment now." Zara looked around the room at faces that represented the machinery of national defense, people whose entire careers were built around making impossible choices in service of the greater good. 6 months ago, she had been one of them, someone who could compartmentalize personal cost in service of operational necessity. But now she carried the memory of Kai's friendship, Professor Sinclair's mentorship, the simple pleasure of studying for exams and worrying about normal problems. She had tasted a different kind of life, one where her value wasn't measured in successful missions or intelligence gathered. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want guarantees about my future. I want the option to return to civilian life when the mission is complete.
I want protection for the relationships I've built at Northview. Done, General Pierce replied without hesitation. Full extraction support, new identity if necessary, educational funding through completion of your degree. And if I don't come back? The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Everyone in the room understood the statistical reality of deep cover operations in hostile territory. Success was measured not just in objectives achieved, but in operatives who survived to report their accomplishments. Then Northview University will receive an endowment in memory of Zara Blackwood, the art major who died in a car accident while visiting family, General Pierce said quietly. The promise was both comforting and terrifying. Even in death, her civilian identity would be protected, her college friendships preserved from the knowledge of what she had really been. I need 5 minutes, Zara said, stepping away from the briefing table. In the hallway outside, she pulled out her phone and composed a message to Kai. Thank you for reminding me who I want to be. I'm going to try very hard to come home and figure out how to be that person. She hit send, then turned back toward the briefing room and the mission that would either end her military career or end her life. Either way, she was done running.
The operation lasted 18 hours. When Zara finally emerged from the safe house in Frankfurt, her secure phone contained intelligence that would prevent the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent civilians. The chemical weapons caches had been located and neutralized. The network's key operatives were either in custody or eliminated. The coordinated attacks that would have devastated 3 major European cities had been prevented with less than 6 hours to spare. But the cost of success was written in the exhaustion that had settled into her bones, the fresh scars that would join the collection she already carried, and the knowledge that she had once again proven herself capable of things that most 19-year-olds couldn't imagine. The flight back to the United States felt different from the outbound journey. Colonel Blackthorne spent most of the trip on secure communications, coordinating with intelligence agencies across Europe and updating senior leadership on the operation's success. When he finally closed his laptop and turned his attention to Zara, his expression carried something she hadn't seen from him before: genuine respect mixed with concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm alive," Zara replied, which was her standard response to post-mission debriefings. It was factual, non-committal, and avoided the kind of emotional processing that military psychologists insisted was necessary, but that she had never found particularly helpful. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." She looked out the aircraft window at the Atlantic Ocean passing below them, thinking about the question she had been avoiding since the moment she had accepted the mission. How was she holding up? The professional answer was that she had performed within acceptable parameters, achieved all primary objectives, and maintained operational security throughout the deployment. The personal answer was more complicated. "I remembered why I was good at this, and I remembered why I hated being good at it." Elaborate. The intelligence gathering, the tactical planning, the ability to read people and situations, that part felt natural. It felt like using abilities I was born with. She paused, gathering thoughts that had been churning throughout the operation. But the killing, the deception, the constant awareness that every person I met might be planning to murder me, that part still feels like wearing someone else's skin. Blackthorne nodded, recognizing the internal conflict that affected many of his best operatives. The good news is that you don't have to choose between being capable and being human. The bad news is that you'll probably never be able to completely separate those parts of yourself. "Is that why you came to find me? Because you knew I'd never really be able to leave this behind?" "I came to find you because Europe was facing a terrorist attack that you were uniquely qualified to prevent," Blackthorne replied. "But yes, I also knew that 3 months of playing college student hadn't erased 18 months of combat experience. People don't recover from what you've been through by pretending it never happened." The observation stung because it contained an uncomfortable amount of truth. For 3 months, Zara had been treating her time at Northview like an extended vacation from reality, a chance to pretend that her military service was something that had happened to someone else. But the moment real danger appeared, her training had reasserted itself with undeniable force. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Do I go back to Northview and pretend this never happened? Do I accept that I'll always be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next crisis that requires someone with my specific skill set?" You go back to Northview and figure out how to integrate both parts of who you are. You stop pretending being capable of violence makes you inherently violent. You start treating your military experience as one aspect of your identity rather than the entirety of it. The aircraft began its descent toward Andrews Air Force Base, where Zara would begin the transition back to civilian life. Through the window, she could see the familiar landscape of the East Coast, a view that had once represented safety and home. Now it carried the additional weight of responsibility, the knowledge that her ability to live peacefully depended on her willingness to occasionally sacrifice that peace for the protection of others. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dean Reed. "The university has voted to establish the Blackwood Scholarship for veterans transitioning to civilian education. We'd like you to be our first recipient and help design the program. No pressure, but we think you might have insights that could help others." Another message, this one from Professor Sinclair: "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding military history education. Would you be interested in guest lecturing? I think our students could benefit from perspectives that textbooks can't provide."
And then the message she had been both hoping for and dreading, from Kai. "Your room is exactly as you left it. I've been doing both sides of the laundry because I figured you'd want clean sheets when you got home. Also, I saved you some cookies from the care package my mom sent. We need to talk, but I'm glad you're coming back." The simple acceptance in Kai's message made Zara's throat tighten. After everything that had been revealed, after all the lies and deceptions that had been exposed, someone was still willing to call Northview home for her. As the aircraft touched down, Zara realized that the integration Blackthorne had described wasn't going to be simple or comfortable. She would return to campus as someone fundamentally changed by recent events, someone who could no longer pretend to be just another college student worried about ordinary problems. But perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Perhaps the combination of tactical expertise and academic curiosity, of combat experience and intellectual growth, could create something valuable rather than simply conflicted. The debriefing at Andrews was mercifully brief. General Pierce reviewed the operation's success, formally thanked Zara for her service, and confirmed the arrangements that had been made for her continued education. The paperwork that would allow her to return to civilian life while maintaining her security clearance was processed with military efficiency. "One last question," General Pierce said as the session concluded. "Will you accept reactivation if a similar situation arises?" Zara considered the question carefully. 24 hours earlier, she would have said no without hesitation. Now, carrying the knowledge that her skills had prevented mass casualties, the answer was more complex. "I'll accept consultation," she said finally. "Intelligence analysis, tactical planning, training support. But I won't return to deep cover operations unless the threat is existential and no other options exist." Fair enough. That level of expertise is valuable even in that advisory capacity. As Zara left the Pentagon complex, she felt the strange sensation of existing between worlds. She was no longer the naive freshman who had arrived at Northview 3 months earlier, but she wasn't the hardened operative who had disappeared from a German hospital either. She was something new, something that would require both courage and patience to fully understand. The drive back to Montana gave her time to process the events of the past week, to prepare for conversations that would be difficult but necessary. She would need to explain to her friends why she had lied without asking them to forgive the lies themselves. She would need to find ways to contribute to the Northview community that honored her military experience and her academic goals. Most importantly, she would need to learn how to live with the knowledge that she was capable of extraordinary things, both beautiful and terrible, and that this capability carried responsibilities that would follow her for the rest of her life. As the university's familiar skyline appeared on the horizon, Zara felt a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty that had nothing to do with tactical planning or operational security. This was the anxiety of someone returning home after a profound change, hoping that the people and places she cared about would still have room for who she had become. The helicopters were gone from the quad. Students moved across the campus pads with the casual confidence of people whose biggest concerns involved homework deadlines and weekend plans. From a distance, everything looked exactly as she had left it. But Zara knew that, for her, nothing would ever be quite the same again. And for the first time since the whole ordeal had begun, she thought that might be exactly as it should be.
6 weeks after the helicopters had first landed on Northview's quad, the campus had settled into a new kind of normal. The media attention had eventually moved on to other stories, but the changes that Zara's revelation had set in motion continued to ripple through the university community in ways both large and small. The most visible change was the construction taking place behind the Defense Study Center. What had once been a maintenance building was being converted into the Veterans Transition Center, a facility designed to support military personnel pursuing higher education. The project had been fast-tracked with federal funding, private donations, and the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that usually only appeared when powerful people decided something was genuinely important. Zara stood in what would soon become the center's main classroom, reviewing architectural plans with Dr. Patricia Vance, the dean who had become an unlikely ally in designing programs that bridged military experience and academic learning. "The simulation lab goes here," Dr. Vance explained, pointing to a space that would house advanced computer systems for tactical training and strategic analysis. "We're thinking it could serve dual purposes: research facility for students studying international relations and training space for veterans maintaining their certifications." "Good design," Zara replied, studying the layout with an eye trained to assess both educational functionality and security requirements. "But you'll want to relocate the entrance. Too much foot traffic past the sensitive equipment. And these windows need to be replaced with something that can't be observed from external buildings." Dr. Vance made notes on her tablet, no longer surprised by Zara's ability to identify security concerns that civilian planners missed. Over the past month, their working relationship had evolved from administrative necessity to genuine collaboration, built on mutual respect for each other's expertise. "How are the first applicants looking?" "Promising. We have 12 veterans enrolled for spring semester, ages ranging from 22 to 38. Combat experience in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and several classified locations that I'm probably not supposed to know about." Dr. Vance smiled. "They're all excited about the prospect of learning from someone who actually understands what they've been through." The responsibility of that expectation weighed heavily on Zara. These would be men and women who had served their country with distinction, who were now seeking to transform their military experience into civilian success. They would look to her not just as an instructor, but as proof that the transition was possible. "Speaking of which," Dr. Vance continued, "we've received an interesting request from the Department of Defense. They want to send a delegation to observe our program, potentially use it as a model for similar initiatives at other universities." Zara felt the familiar tension that came with increased visibility. Success in civilian life seemed to require the same kind of public attention that had made her military service so psychologically difficult. What kind of timeline are they looking at? "Next month. They want to see the program in operation, interview participants, assess the integration model we're developing." Dr. Vance paused, studying Zara's expression. "I told them the program's success depends entirely on your comfort with their involvement." The consideration was appreciated, but Zara understood the larger implications. If the Northview model proved successful, it could help thousands of veterans across the country make the transition to civilian life. Her personal discomfort with attention was a small price to pay for that kind of impact. "I can handle a delegation,
but I want input on the structure of their visit. This isn't a dog and pony show. It's an educational program with real students facing real challenges. Before Dr. Vance could respond, Zara's phone buzzed with a message from Kai. Emergency meeting in our room. Bring coffee and that thing you do where you pretend everything is normal when it's obviously not. Zara excused herself from the construction site and walked across campus toward Maple Ridge Hall, noting the subtle ways that student life had adapted to her presence. Conversations still paused when she passed, but the tone had shifted from fearful curiosity to something approaching respect. Some students nodded in greeting. Others averted their eyes not from fear, but from the awkwardness of not knowing how to interact with someone whose experiences were so far outside their frame of reference. She found Kai in their shared room, surrounded by textbooks, newspapers, and printouts from various websites. Her roommate's expression mixed excitement with the kind of focused intensity that usually preceded major academic projects. "Okay," Kai said without preamble. "I've been doing research." "Research on what?"
On you. Not in a creepy way, Kai added quickly, but in an academic way. For my journalism class, Professor Martinez assigned us to write in-depth profiles of someone whose story challenges conventional assumptions about identity and public service. Zara sat down on her meticulously made bed, feeling a familiar wariness about becoming the subject of academic scrutiny. "And you chose me." "I chose my roommate, who turned out to be one of the most decorated intelligence operatives of her generation," Kai corrected. "Do you realize that in 18 months of active service, you received more commendations than most soldiers earn in entire careers? That your intelligence reports are credited with preventing at least 4 major terrorist attacks?" "That's classified information." "Not anymore. Most of it was declassified last week as part of a Pentagon initiative to highlight successful counterterrorism operations." Kai held up a thick folder. "Your service record reads like something out of a movie, except it's real, and you were living 10 feet away from me while I complained about organic chemistry homework." The surreal nature of the situation wasn't lost on Zara. For 3 months, she had been desperate to hide her military background. Now that same background was being studied, analyzed, and potentially celebrated in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. "What's the point of the profile?" she asked. "To challenge stereotypes about who serves in the military and how that service shapes civilian life. To show that heroes aren't always what we expect them to look like." Kai's enthusiasm was infectious, despite Zara's reservations. But mostly to tell the story of someone who sacrificed her own peace of mind to protect people she would never meet. "I'm not a hero, Kai. I'm just someone who is trained to do specific things and who happened to be in positions where those things were needed." "See? That's exactly the kind of thing a hero would say," Kai grinned, but her expression quickly became more serious. "Can I ask you something? And will you give me an honest answer instead of the deflection thing you do when conversations get too personal?" Zara nodded, recognizing that their friendship had reached a point where complete honesty was the only way forward. "Do you regret it? Coming here, trying to be someone else, letting people like me get close to you before we knew who you really were?" The question cut to the heart of everything Zara had been wrestling with since her return from Europe. Did she regret the deception that had made genuine friendship possible? Did she regret the vulnerability that had allowed her to experience normal life? Did she regret the pain that her revelations had caused people who had trusted her? "I regret the lies. I regret that you had to find out who I was through news reports instead of honest conversation. I regret that my presence here put you and everyone else at risk without your knowledge or consent. But I don't regret the friendship. I don't regret learning that I could be more than just what I was trained to be. And I don't regret discovering that there are people in the world who can see past someone's worst capabilities to their best intentions." Kai's smile was radiant. "That's going in the profile. You're really going to write about me. I'm going to write about us, about the friendship that survived deception because it was built on genuine connection. About the roommate who taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do the right thing despite being terrified of the consequences. As Kai returned to her research, Zara reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 6 weeks. She was no longer the frightened exile who had fled to Northview seeking anonymity. She was becoming something new, an educator, a bridge between military and civilian communities, someone whose experience could help others navigate the complex process of redefining identity after service. The transformation wasn't complete, and probably never would be. She still woke up some nights from dreams that mixed memories of combat with anxieties about midterm exams. She still found herself automatically assessing threats in completely safe environments. She still struggled with the weight of secrets that would follow her for the rest of her life. But she was no longer running from those realities. Instead, she was learning to integrate them into a life that honored her service and her dreams, both her capabilities and her humanity. Outside their window, construction continued on the Veterans Transition Center that would bear her name and carry forward her vision of supporting others who were making similar journeys. It was a legacy she could be proud of, a way of serving that built rather than destroyed. For the first time since she could remember, Zara was looking forward to what came next.
1 year later, the Blackwood Veterans Transition Center had become the heart of a transformation that extended far beyond Northview University's campus boundaries. The program had been replicated at 17 universities across the country, with applications pending for 12 more. What had started as an emergency response to one student's crisis had evolved into a national model for supporting military personnel transitioning to civilian life. Zara stood in the center's main auditorium, watching the latest cohort of veteran students present their capstone projects to an audience that included Pentagon officials, university administrators, and representatives from veteran service organizations. The presentations ranged from innovative approaches to post-traumatic stress treatment, to technological solutions for battlefield medical care, to policy proposals for improving veteran education benefits. These weren't just academic exercises. Several of the projects had already attracted funding from government agencies and private foundations. 2 students had received job offers from major defense contractors. Another had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program at MIT. The combination of military experience and civilian education was proving to be exactly as powerful as Zara had hoped. "Remarkable," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the Pentagon's Deputy Director for Personnel Transitions, who had flown in specifically to observe the program. "I've reviewed veteran education initiatives across 3 decades, and I've never seen integration this successful. Your students aren't just adapting to civilian life. They're excelling in ways that leverage their military experience, rather than hiding from it." Zara nodded, watching Marcus Williams present his research on improving communication systems for special operations units. Marcus had arrived at Northview 8 months earlier, carrying injuries from an IED explosion in Afghanistan, and convinced that his military service had no value in civilian academic settings. Now, he was pursuing a master's degree in electrical engineering while consulting for the Department of Defense on communications security. The key was creating an environment where military experience is treated as an asset rather than a liability. These students don't need to be fixed or healed. They need to be given tools to translate their capabilities into civilian applications. "And you've proven that approach works," Dr. Chen replied, "which is why I'm here with a proposition." Zara felt the familiar wariness that came with official propositions. Over the past year, she had received numerous offers that would have expanded her influence, but required her to leave Northview and the community she had worked so hard to build. What kind of proposition? The Secretary of Defense wants to create a new position, Director of Veteran Academic Integration. The role would oversee the expansion of programs like this one, developing national standards for veteran education, and serving as a liaison between military and academic communities. The offer was significant, both in terms of responsibility and potential impact.
As director, Zara could influence policy affecting thousands of veterans, shape how military experience was valued in civilian settings, and ensure that the integration model developed at Northview became standard practice rather than experimental program. "Where would I be based?" she asked. "That's the unusual part. The secretary specifically requested that you maintain your position here at Northview. The program's success is too closely tied to your personal involvement to risk disrupting it. You'd travel for conferences and oversight visits, but your primary office would remain on this campus." The arrangement was almost too good to be true. National influence without abandoning the local community. Policy impact without sacrificing the personal relationships that had become central to her identity. The ability to serve at the highest levels while maintaining the teaching and mentoring roles that gave her work meaning. "I'll need to think about it," Zara said, though she could already feel herself leaning toward acceptance. "Of course, but I should mention that the position comes with one additional responsibility. The Secretary of Defense wants you to serve as his personal advisor on special operations personnel transitions. There are currently 47 operatives in situations similar to what you experienced. Highly skilled individuals struggling to adapt to civilian life after intense service experiences." 47 people facing the same demons she had wrestled with? 47 individuals who might benefit from someone who understood both the burden of classified service and the possibility of building a meaningful life afterward. The opportunity to help them avoid the isolation and desperation that had driven her to flee to a college dormitory was too important to decline. "I accept," she said. Dr. Chen smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. The official announcement will be made next week, but I wanted to inform you personally. Your work here has changed how the military thinks about post-service transitions."
As Dr. Chan left to catch her flight back to Washington, Zara remained in the auditorium, listening to the final presentations. These students represented living proof that military service could be a foundation for civilian success rather than an obstacle to overcome. Their achievements validated everything she had believed about the potential for integration rather than separation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Kai, who was now a senior majoring in journalism with a focus on military affairs. "Saw the official car leaving campus. Big news? Also, dinner at 6 if you want to celebrate whatever just happened." The casual tone of the message reflected how naturally their friendship had evolved. Kai no longer treated Zara with the careful deference that had marked their early interactions after the revelation. She had returned to the easy familiarity of someone who had shared too many late-night conversations and dining hall meals to be intimidated by military credentials. Another message, this one from Professor Sinclair: "Pentagon visit went well, I assume. Faculty meeting tomorrow to discuss the new federal grant applications. Your input on veteran-specific curriculum development would be valuable." And then, unexpectedly, a message from Colonel Blackthorne. "Heard about the appointment. Well deserved. The secretary made the right choice, though I suspect you'll find Washington politics more challenging than Syrian terrorist networks." The observation made Zara smile. Blackthorne was probably right about the relative challenges, but she had learned something important over the past year. The skills that made someone effective in combat could also make them effective in education, administration, and policy development. The key was finding the right environment and the right support system. As she walked across campus toward Maple Ridge Hall, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 18 months earlier, she had been a highly decorated operative with no clear path to civilian life. 12 months earlier, she had been a frightened freshman hiding from her past in a small Montana university. 6 months earlier, she had been someone forced to choose between personal peace and professional duty. Now, she was something entirely new, a bridge between worlds that had historically remained separate.
someone whose experience could help others navigate transitions that had once seemed impossible. The integration she had achieved in her own life was becoming a model for others, proof that military service and civilian success could be complementary rather than contradictory. Her phone rang with a call from her father, the first contact she had had with family since arriving at Northview. For months, she had been afraid to reach out, uncertain how to explain her choices or her circumstances. Now, with her life finally stable and her future clearly defined, she felt ready for that conversation. "Dad," she said, answering on the second ring. "I saw the news," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Zara. Not for the military service, though that was extraordinary. Not for the academic achievements, though those are impressive. I'm proud of you for finding a way to help other people discover what they're capable of achieving." The words carried her back to the photograph she still kept in her psychology textbook, to his inscription about courage lighting the way home. She finally understood what he had meant. Courage wasn't just about facing external threats. It was about having the strength to become who you were meant to be, even when that journey required confronting your own fears and limitations. "I think I finally figured out what home means." "What's that?" "Home isn't a place you return to. It's what you build when you stop running and start helping other people find their way." As she ended the call and climbed the stairs to her dormitory room, Zara realized that her story had become something larger than personal redemption or individual achievement. It had become proof that the most unlikely transformations were possible when someone was brave enough to be vulnerable, wise enough to accept help, and generous enough to extend that same opportunity to others. The freshman who had once been terrified of discovery had become someone who helped others discover their own potential. The operative who had fled from her service had found a way to continue serving that honored her capabilities and her humanity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that integration was possible, new chances to help others write their own stories of transformation and growth. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.